Hi everyone, welcome to today's mini lecture on evolution and speciation in wood warblers, where I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the driving forces in evolution in wood warblers, as well as some of the things that are driving speciation. So warblers, now I'm referring to as wood warblers, and that's to differentiate them from what are called Old World warblers. Old World warblers are in the family Sylviidae, and New World warblers are in the family Parulidae and are more properly called the wood warblers. Now you'll note that both of those words end in DAE, and that's one thing that you'll learn in taxonomy is that all animal family names end in DAE. These two groups of warblers are not very closely related, and you can see on the left in that picture are two of the Old World warblers, and they're very dull. They have elaborate songs, but they're very dull. And on the right are two New World warblers, or wood warblers, in the family Parulidae, and they are stunningly beautiful birds. So why are they so colorful? So one thing is we can think about usually colorful species have some sort of sexual selection involved. But we want to look at also whether natural selection is involved and whether that's driving any of it, and then a little bit on how speciation is occurring in warbler species. So there's an article by Simpson et al. That focused on natural and sexual selection in the evolution of color and conspicuousness, so how much they stand out. And they found that natural selection and sexual selection were both simultaneously working, with natural selection tending to drive cryptic coloration, meaning camouflage coloration, and sexual selection tending to drive conspicuous coloration, and it was acting on different body parts. So in both of these we know can drive speciation. We need some sort of selective force or a strong element of genetic drift that will lead to speciation. Now let's look at the Kirtland's warbler, Michigan's endemic bird species, as an example. And this bird species has ground nesting they are ground nesting species. And what Simpson et al. Found was that ground nesting males were having evolution of their underbody plumage to be bright because they would sit up in a tree and sing, but when they wanted to be on the nest, they needed to be cryptic, so they would have cryptic upper body plumage. So the backs of these are cryptic and the bellies are conspicuous. And it shows that evolution can be driven both by natural and sexual selection at the same time. Here's the female Kirtland's warbler, and you can see how cryptic she is. She still has a fairly yellow belly, but that's not exposed while she's sitting on her nest. The male Kirtland's warbler again, and then the contrasting, closely related magnolia warbler that you can see has a much more conspicuous back pattern because it nests high in trees and is not worried about predators coming at it from above while it sits on a nest on the ground. We see this in the warblers, that ones that nest in cavities, for example, like the prothonotary warbler pictured at lower right, have very striking color patterns and incredibly bright heads and such. You could never hide the head of a prothonotary warbler if it was nesting on the ground, but if it's nesting inside a tree cavity, nothing can see it. The golden-winged warbler on top there, that's the female golden-winged, and she's pretty cryptic in her ground nest. Now, a brief little bit about speciation in these warblers, in different warbler species. So we have the yellow-rumped warbler that has two distinct populations in the United States and Canada, and actually two additional populations in in Mexico and Central America. And there are actually four distinct populations here: the myrtle and audubons that are found in the United States and Canada, the black-fronted found in Mexico, and Goldman's found in Guatemala. And they all live in different areas, so you can think about what kind of speciation could be occurring in these. And remember, different areas means allopatric speciation. So here you can see the map of the areas where these live, and the myrtle form of the yellow-rumped warbler has the largest range all the way to Alaska, to the Maritime provinces, down to Michigan. The Audubon's warbler is in the western United States, and they overlap in British Columbia and do hybridize a little bit with the myrtle warbler. The black-fronted warblers populations are in Mexico, and Goldman's warbler in Guatemala. Now, this is all considered a single species by the American Ornithological Union. So they help determine how we're going to name bird species in the United States. But in contrast, the International Ornithological Committee considers it 3 species, with black-fronted, Goldman's, and then the North American yellow-rumped warbler being the 3 species. The biggest genetic difference, though, actually is between those 2 North American forms, or the 2 United States and Canada forms, the myrtle and the Audubon's. And so that evidence would suggest that they should be considered separate species. Now, whether they're considered separate species or not doesn't negate the fact that they are undergoing allopatric speciation, and only gene flow among the myrtle and Audubon's may be slowing that a little bit, but there's minimal gene flow there. Now, as we think about this, and this was just a mini lecture here, the takeaway points, one important one is that evolution can simultaneously act as natural selection on some traits and sexual selection on others. And we saw that with the contrast in natural selection acting on the back color for ground nesting birds, keeping them cryptic, but there was sexual selection driving their belly color and keeping them very bright and standing out. Speciation is an ongoing process in some species, and allopatric speciation, remember, we can always understand that the easiest because we can see how gene flow would be reduced, whereas sympatric speciation is a little bit harder. Now that gets us to the question of our golden-winged and blue-winged warblers that live in sympatry now, and the question would be, how did they get to initially have those differences? Were they allopatric at some point in time, or were they always sympatric?